All right. Welcome, everybody, to this Week in Mormons International Edition and Expanded Edition.
Woo!
Welcome. We have another guest host amongst the older two guest hosts, Danny Ferreira and myself, Daniel Yanez. And we have with us Georgia Travers from England. Georgia, you want to say hi, introduce yourself to the TWIM audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on the podcast. So, as Daniel said, my name is Georgia Travers. I am from England. So, we've got two South Americans and one European.
Oh, we couldn't tell by the accent. We just couldn't.
Yeah. Where is she
Yeah.
from? She's from Texas, probably.
Yeah, I'm
I
actually
don't
from
know.
Australia. No, I'm from England. I'm from just north of London. It's a place called Hertfordshire, if you've heard of it. And I've lived here most of my life, with the exception of 1 year where I lived in Australia. So my husband's Australian, so we lived out there, got married over there, and then we came back here.
That's really nice. We're covering so many accents and time zones and names. And I'm glad you said Hertfordshire. When I moved here, it took me a week or so to figure out that that was the pronunciation. I think most people in the US or elsewhere would say Hertfordshire, right, Danny?
Hertfordshire, yes,
Yeah,
like the Shire from the Lord of the Rings, right?
yeah.
Yeah, Hertfordshire is the official way to say it.
Hertford.
Okay.
I'm sure our
Can-
US audience is loving this, by the way. Something I noticed when I lived there is that they have a big fascination with all things UK. Well, not everybody, but most people. Even when I was moving here, when I told people, yeah, I'm moving to just outside of London, etc., most people were like, oh, I'm so jealous. I dream of living there, etc. I'm like, okay. Yeah. So I hope our US listeners are loving your accent, Georgia.
Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
funny. I was in London yesterday, and with it being August in the summer in the UK, it's quite touristy in London. And I was just thinking how much I dislike London. living about 20 minutes away from London, how much I don't like it, whereas everyone else travels to see London and how much they love it. But I just see it a lot of litter and a big city, and I much prefer the countryside and, or even going to the
Uh,
beach or being in the mountains.
I think we get to appreciate the things we've got once we're far away from them or once we lose them in a way. So I think it's just interesting to see that you're quite opposite to most people in terms of visiting London and enjoying the city as a city. Like, I don't know, New York City. It's like 3 hours away from where I am right now, and it's crowded, packed of people every day during summer, and it's just crazy with, I don't know, 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 30 something Celsius. But still, it's packed of people and people just walking and just visiting shops, right? So it's sometimes surprising, annoying maybe, but it's the way humans are, and we love the things that we don't have at home, or as people say, the grass is greener in our neighbors, right?
Yeah.
Yard. So sometimes it's just we just desire the things that we don't usually have.
It's like
And
a paradox, like the tourist paradox. Locals see how the sausage is made there. Well, the tourist just goes to there. Like I went to Barcelona once, and in the summer, and it was not a mistake. It was nice, but it was so packed, and I'm pretty sure the locals hated all of us for being there, kind of littering
sure.
or making noise and whatnot. But yeah, it's great to have you, Georgia, and we're gonna want to spend some time doing like a get to know Georgia a bit more, and then we're gonna jump into articles of news later on with the three of us. So we'll see how that goes. We're trying this new kind of hybrid light interview and articles of news format with the international edition of TWIM. So
Georgia, can I ask you something? I what called my attention is that you mentioned that your husband is Australian and then you lived there for a year.
Mm.
Tell us a little bit about it. I think it's just interesting to hear the story.
Yeah, it is quite a funny story. We only we met each other really by chance. I had been a member of the church for about a year. I was 21. I joined the church when I was 20, and I'd agreed to go along with the missionaries to help them teach someone who was learning about the gospel. And my husband was on exchange that day, and he was one of the missionaries who was teaching this person. And so I turned up and I met him, and that's how we met. So then he went home from his mission a few months later. He got back in contact with me, and things just escalated really quickly. We decided that we needed to see each other again. So I went out to Australia, and everything fell into place, decided to move there, and we got married, and then we decided to move back to the UK. So it was a cool story, because there were lots of things that couldn't have happened, and we wouldn't have met, but we did meet. And I wasn't even meant to be in that area, because I had applied to a different university, Durham University, and then I ended up not going to Durham. I ended up going to Bristol University instead, and then that's where I met him. So, lots of things just fell into place for us to meet. But yeah, I'm glad that we did meet. We got 3 children now. We got a 3-year-old and twins who are 7 months old. So life is very busy. I'm on maternity leave for a year.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds nice. I'm sure some of our listeners outside of the UK,
US.
like, wow, in your maternity. But that's so great of a story, and made me think of a lot of instances in which, those little decisions, right, that are unexpected. I know your story, Danny, as well, with your wife. Like, I think we can all.
I wanted to mention something that, I mean, I've heard this before, but many people would say that being a member of the church puts you in a place where it's a very small pond, right? A very small space where you get to meet people. But when I hear the stories, I mean, even your story, Danny, and my story, and Georgia's story, I think the total opposite, right? It's not a small pond. Is being a member. All my perception is that it opens more opportunities to get to know more people, and I think cool people, right? That gets to be part of our lives, and then for me, it's just another way of seeing how fantastic is just being active in the church, because most of the time these stories happen while we're serving or while we're doing things in the church, right?
As part of this
So
community,
yes, it's
definitely.
just nice and interesting to see it, and how these things pile up into what we are today, and how our lives change because of them, right? So
yeah. And one of the reasons why I was really interested in inviting Georgia to join us is that, Georgia, you're a convert to the church, right? Danny and I, we were sons of converts, whereas you, in your early adulthood, made this big decision. But also, maybe you can tell us a bit later, you did share with me before that you have some pioneer connections as well, which for a convert might be kind of an interesting kind of two data points that usually don't go together. So can you tell us a bit more about, I don't know, how you got to know the church, and maybe all those
Yeah, absolutely. I love talking about this kind of stuff. So I'm glad that I've got a forum to do so. And if you have any questions, just jump right in and ask me if I'm not being clear at any point. I've always been interested in religion, always. So I didn't grow up in a religious household at all. I never learned about God. I never learned about faith-based things. It was just there was no faith. We didn't have that narrative at home. But somehow I remember, even from the age of 5 or 6, I always believed in something bigger. I always believed in God, and I would talk to him, even though I'd never learnt about him, which is funny. I guess I was just born with that gift of that knowledge of a heavenly Father, or in some entity. And then it was when I was at university. I mean, there's a huge long story. I'd be here for hours if I were to tell you the whole story. I was at university, and I think university is a time for a lot of people where they sort of find themselves, because they've left home. They're asking lots of big questions about what they actually believe. And for me, I was studying physics. So, a wonderful subject to study, where you're learning about the cosmos and all sorts of things, and, quantum physics and all the rest of it. Really, really
it's
deep
one that
stuff.
seems so fun until you start studying it, I guess, and gets really tough.
You know what I say? I say to anyone, the more you study physics, the less you understand, genuinely. It's one of those really mind-blowing areas to study and to learn about. So I was studying physics. I was thinking about really deep questions about the universe, about why we were here. And actually, looking back on journals in the July before the September that I'm about to talk about, so 2 months before big changes happened in my life, I'd actually written in a journal a prayer, and it was a prayer to find the right place for me, to find the right church, to find the right place where my views would sort of marry up with a gospel. So then it came to September, and it was my second year of university. I was living in this big house there were 10 other people. So there were 11 of us in total. And my friend came downstairs at 3 o'clock in the morning. And like university students do, we were all awake. We were chatting. We were just, not thinking about the fact that we needed to wake up in the morning. And he came downstairs, and he'd been unpacking his bag from home, and he said, "Hey, I got given this leaflet on the street. Does anybody want it?" And it was a pamphlet, one of those church produced ones. I think it was the Restoration. I don't know if they still use them, or maybe they.
I remember those would have been the one I used back in my day.
Yeah. It's got a picture of Jesus Christ on the front. I remember that. And I turned it over, and it said Mormon.org. So I just, in that moment, 3 o'clock in the morning, went on Mormon.org. And the first thing which came up was that you could request missionaries to come to your house. So I thought, well, go on then. Why not? I'm interested in, and at this point, I was interested in learning about all religions. I wasn't interested in joining from that, that point. And so I put my details in, didn't think anything about it, went to bed, woke up the next day. And then literally a couple of hours later, we got a knock on the door, and there were 2 missionaries there. And
wow, that was faster than Amazon.
Faster than Amazon. They were efficient. They thought that it was a prank, a hoax, because there were 11 of us university students, and we were all laughing at the fact that they had turned up so quickly. So they nearly left and went away. But I think I said, no, come in, come and talk to us.
Yeah.
So they did, and they attempted to teach a lesson, but I just kept bombarding them with 1,000 questions. Why can I not call you by your first name? Why are you wearing suits? I was quite argumentative in the early days, but I really felt something. I don't know what it was that I felt. I didn't know what it was at the time, but it was a draw and a pull that made me want to invite them to come back again. So they did. And I'd say for the first
quick question. So on that first lesson, the 11 of you were there, not just you, also your classmates, or?
Yeah,
they were coming and going.
Oh, I imagine that lesson.
Yeah, no, there were 10 of us. So
wow,
10 people listened in. And then the second time they came back, it was, 5 or 6 people. And then eventually it was just my friend and I, and then eventually just me. And for the first, couple of weeks, I was pretty argumentative. I wouldn't let them get through a lesson. I just wanted to talk about religion because I found it interesting. I was not in a frame to join any sort of church. But then the more that I learned about it, the more that I realized that it was very much what I already believed. And it sounds cliche, but it felt like I was remembering what I'd believed before rather than learning something new.
You found your place.
Yeah, it was the first time in my life where I felt like everything finally made sense. So within about 3 months, I was just fully all in and wanted to be baptized and haven't looked back. It's coming up for my 10-year anniversary of my baptism.
Wow.
It's been wonderful.
When is that? Next year, right?
Yeah, it's coming up next year, so it's been 9 years.
So nice. Well, it's a great story, and it's always I'd like to hear how people come to become a part of this community, and from a faith standpoint, how those conversion stories play out. And it's impossible to deny kind of something up there, kind of putting things together until they happen. So you did go to Mormon.org from the Mormon days. Mormon.org, yeah. Back in my day, I remember teaching at the MTC in the late 2000s, 2008, 2009, when Mormon.org was just ramping up and kind of getting there and training missionaries from the MTC to chat, right? It was very early, though. We're getting much better at that. And now it's commandtochrist.org, I think, the new one.
Yeah, everything feels kind of more Christ focused, which I think is good. I think as an outsider, I didn't quite realize what it was at first. And I think that's a lot more obvious to the outsider now, or at least I hope it is.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thanks. And for me, it's a delight to hear more of these little details. I've heard parts of it probably because, full disclosure, George and I go to the same ward here. I also live in Hertfordshire. I hope I said it right. So that's how we know each other. But yeah, it's the first time that Danny Ferreira in Troy, New York, and Georgia meet. So twin bringing the world together. So
Thanks for
so
that.
and
Thanks for that. Yeah.
yeah, and one last question from me, Georgia, and I don't know, Dan, if you have any, but what was something that surprised you about the church once you joined? Because it sounds like from a doctrinal, from a belief standpoint, you kind of clicked straight away. But were there like maybe some more cultural quirks or things that maybe not at the beginning, but throughout these almost 10 years that you've seen as a convert to the church, they were like, oh well, that's interesting, or wasn't expecting that.
Oh,
Anything
thousands.
comes to mind?
Thousands of things. You know, I have a very clear memory of my first Sunday in at church when I came as an investigator, I suppose. We don't really use
Mm,
that term anymore, but as someone who was looking into the church, I remember thinking, why on earth are they drinking water instead of wine? I just could not get over that. It made me laugh. I thought that the sacrament prayers, I thought they were pre-recorded because it came from a different microphone and I
right.
couldn't work it because they were kneeling. I couldn't work out where the sound was coming from.
Yeah.
So I thought that it was a pre-recording. There were so many things. I still to this day can't work out why we put an initial, Russell M. Nelson. Why do we not just call him Russell Nelson?
Oh,
You
that's
know,
one of my pet peeves. Yay.
yeah, me as well. I never knew that about you, Daniel, that it
Yeah, it's
frustrates
one of
you
my
as well.
pet peeves.
Yeah, because
I
how many
deliberately, sometimes, even from the pulpit, I refer to some of the apostles just by the name and surname to normalize that that's their name, that the middle one, unless they made it really express. Like, for example, M. Russell Ballard, it seems like really
yeah.
deliberate that they want to go by Russell, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, even now I try to do that, and I hope people don't hate me for that.
No,
Sorry,
I'm
go
I'm
ahead.
I'm glad to have found someone on the same wavelength as me. I've never found anyone who gets as annoyed by it as I do. But yeah, let's just normalize. David Bednar
Yeah,
is his
yeah,
name.
yeah.
We don't have to put the what is it, David A. Bednar?
Well, in South America, we have an even more complex thing because we have two last names.
Yeah.
So we should be using both, right? So, well,
Yeah, and we never use initials. Like in the US, at least, I found that initials, even outside the church, sometimes are used more. Sometimes people merge their two initials and that becomes their name, like TJ something, right? TJ
Mm,
Maxx. Sometimes. But but yeah, in Chile, nobody does that. So, or in the rest of Latin America, so sometimes when general authorities from that region are called, and then you see in the Leajona kind of the name with the middle initial that we've never used in Spanish, feels like, oh, okay, it's fallen into the pattern. But I've noticed a few that don't do it. I guess deliberately they say, no, my name is this and that. I can't remember any particular names. Maybe,
Patrick
or listeners,
Kieran.
maybe we can go and check the magazine and see who is
Yeah,
using.
there's a Elder Kieran. So he gave a talk at conference
Mhm.
recently, and
From the UK.
he's from the UK, and yeah, I don't think he has an initial, but maybe he doesn't have a middle name. But
Maybe.
Patrick Kieran is one.
Yeah, I've given a few priesthood blessings here, where I asked like, "What's the full name?" And quite a few here they say that no middle name, so it makes it easier for me. That's good. And then I run into other people from Spain, from Portugal sometimes. There's a lot of names. It gets difficult. But great. Well, Georgia, it's a pleasure to have you here. Danny, I don't know if you have any questions for Georgia before we shift to articles of news.
well, I have many, but I don't think they're right now the best questions to be made. I'm just again happy to get to know you a little bit, and thanks for sharing your story. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes we take these things for granted, but even Danny in UK and myself, being members of the church our whole lives, have our own conversion stories. So I think it's important to recognize the fact that we all have a conversion process, and sometimes we have a reconversion process in time, and it's relevant and critical to hear from others, because that in a way strengthens our own experience, and makes us think about the importance of having our own testimony in a time where we've bombarded with so many bits of information and friends that are, for whatever reason, leaving the church, or people that are becoming critical of our beliefs. And it's just, I
Mhm.
think, a good way
Yeah,
to remember what draws in the first place to the church, and why we're living this life, and the way we're understanding why things happen, and the purpose of our life.
yeah.
I don't
And I
know.
would say
I
that
think
it's always also helpful to have a window into people's experiences that are just different from ours, right? That's the whole point of International Twim, right? If we have any listeners as well that, anything that we're sharing resonates or makes you think, oh, I would love to also share my story or something like that, you have contact at thisweekinmormons.com. I always get it wrong, but feel free to reach out, and we would love to have a bit more of a community of international people that want to be involved. Also, we invite you to subscribe to Patreon to get the extra content that we'll get after this episode. And yeah, hopefully it won't be our last time here. It won't be the last time for Georgia either. And yeah, we're keen to hear those international stories. I think everybody wins when we hear more diverse and different perspectives on not just the gospel, but also being part of this church community, being part of Mormondom, right? All inclusive of those that are with us, that are may have stepped out of the church but still feel culturally connected to us. It's an important conversation to keep going and to keep the flame alive. So
let's go to
great.
the news.
Let's jump to the news then. Georgia, do you want to kick us off? Maybe one of the news articles of your choice.
Yeah, absolutely. So this week is the first week of August, and it's the week where the new Young Women General Presidency have begun their service. So we've got a new
Yeah,
Young Women President named Emily Belle Freeman, along with her two counselors.
yeah. That's really nice. It's like and we were talking about this before. August 1st is like the start of the tax year, well, the church year, so to speak, because all of the changes, new mission presidents happen in July, I think. Area shifts usually start in August because general authorities tend to take their annual leave, their break in July, and yeah, a lot of things kick off now, and that is that's including of this new presidency. Even I think I saw the last Liahona, and I was expecting to see this new presidency there, but it was still the old one because they were in office until this week. So yeah, any thoughts on that? I think Danny, you were mentioning that you had some thoughts on this.
I mean, I love this new presidency. I think it's quite diverse. That they've been, at least the president has been quite active in social media. I understand she has a YouTube channel, and I've seen her in Instagram, where I get to see some things every now and then. And I think it's just great that they're so active, and they're like welcoming and inclusive. And I think it's the biggest challenge of the church today. Like making everyone feeling they're all connected in a worldwide church, from being a very local church to a church that invites people from all over the world. Is just sometimes challenging to make people feel they belong. Also, this in this presidency, the second counselor, Sister Spanos, is from Argentina, which
Yeah,
is another interesting characteristic of this new presidency, is that we've got people that are not necessarily from Utah,
yeah.
and we've seen this happening more frequently, right? And
Yeah, I
I
think in
mean,
the last 10 years we've had quite a few international ones, or
yes,
at least
and
non
or people from other states in the
other
U.S. or from
backgrounds.
other
Yeah,
places.
or their
Yes,
ethnic
Bec-
backgrounds as well.
I get, again, I get the whole idea behind it, because it's just simpler, to have people from Utah serving in
Mm.
a presidency. But when you have people from different places, as we've highlighted before, it brings diversity, it brings new ideas, different perspectives, and
Yeah,
different life experiences, which of course nourishes the the the, the whole decision making. uh, from my perspective, as a PhD student, I mean, diversity has been tested and proven to be a huge boost in terms
benefit. Yeah,
of decision making, and mental processes. So I think it's just great to have people from different backgrounds.
Yeah, I don't know, Dan,
That's
if
my
you
take
knew
out of
this
that.
sister from being in the same church area before. I seem to recall that her husband might have been like an Area 70 or something like that, because the surname rings familiar, but I'm not sure, to be honest. But it's great to see her. And I don't know what thoughts you have, Georgia, on this, but I do remember from the kind of non-white, non kind of U.S. based general officers that we've had recently. There are a few that have been quite impactful beyond just the scope of their presidency. For example, Cesar Aburto, I think from Nicaragua and many years in the U.S., but from that background, I think some of her talks have been just fantastic and driving the conversation beyond just the scope of where she was serving. And I don't know, it's great to see that indeed. And I don't know Cesar Freeman as much, Cesar Rooney as the other counselor as well, but yeah, looking forward to what they do. I did notice something. I wanted to ask a question. Maybe I'm late to the game, but I did notice in their biography that Cesar Rooney, I think she's the first counselor, she's referred to as a former mission leader, and it doesn't explain much. I was like, okay, so probably her husband was a mission president, but found it quite nice to see that, they're not referring she was the wife of, a mission president, or the, kind of described as an appendage to the husband in this particular case. And maybe that's a change that happened a long time ago and I just didn't notice. I went to the Church News website, and also the link to the Mission President Seminar. It's called Mission Leader Seminar now, kind of bringing full parity on leadership as this joint mission leader group with the mission president and the mission leader spouse on that. So is that new? Or maybe I'm just late to the game. Do you know?
I don't know if it's new, but I think it's wonderful. I also really like it that they're referring to the presidents, even if they're female, as president. I really like that subtle change which has happened in the last couple
Yeah,
of years. I feel like at the moment the church are trying to do a lot to, I suppose, make men and women more equal. I suppose that's a really controversial topic, which we probably won't go into too much, but I feel like steps are being made in the right direction. And I appreciate that. I really love what you said, Daniel, about the fact that it's now referred to as a mission leadership
mission leader. Yeah.
seminar. I feel like that subtle difference is quite profound.
Yeah, it's powerful, and
Mhm.
I did go kind of down the rabbit hole actually when I noticed that. I went to the latest missionary handbook, the one with the rules, the Biblia Blanca, as we will call it in Spanish colloquially, the white Bible, the white book with all the rules. And there's a whole paragraph on this that describes the mission leaders are the mission president and the wife. That's a unit, right?
Mhm.
And it starts off with that. And I don't remember reading that on the previous one. I might be wrong. It's been a
No, I
while
don't
from
remember
reading.
that
Yeah.
either, Danny. So
So
I
if
think,
it
yeah.
happened very recently, great. If it might have happened years ago and we just missed it, and we're delighted to see that. And to close on this one, just an open question. You don't have to answer it, but uh, Sister Freeman, she's a public figure. She's a
Figure.
podcaster, an author known by many. I didn't know her much until she was called, but I saw a lot of people's responses to her calling as something very positive because they knew her. Yeah, I think there's a lot of advantages to that. Now, there might be another side to it, right? Which is what's kind of the externalities of that. And I was thinking a very obvious one to me, at least, is the potential conflict of interest that might come when your career, kind of your outside career, or at least a significant part of it as a public speaker on gospel related things, and you've written books, you have content that gets monetized, etc. Now with this boost of becoming an official church officer, all of that content gets a boost. I understand that she will stop doing that content now and focus 100% on the calling, but yet still you have that kind of that content that was already created that will still generate traffic. What do you do with that? Is there a potential conflict of interest there or not? And if there is the solution to not call these sisters? Is there like what do we do about it? Am I just overthinking this, or do you think it has any merit on at least bringing it up?
I
Sorry,
mean,
coffee.
to be honest, at this point, I think from my perspective, it's just a recognition of the good work she's been doing all these years. I mean,
Yeah.
this shows that she's been doing quite of a powerful impact on what she's done, and which is why she was considered to be called, right? And I think it's something that it's even more surprising, because we know that there are authors in church related content that never get that, let's say, impactful callings, or not necessarily. It's not because they're doing this will happen. So this surprising event of calling Sister Freeman is just a way to say, okay, this person has done so much good with her content, or with her work, that now, as this new calling, we're going to use all her knowledge, experience, and service
Well,
for
that
the.
playing devil's advocate, not devil's advocate, but kind of an angle to that very thing you're saying is like, okay, doesn't mean that the content she produced before does it acquire a new status, because it was apocryphal, in a sense. It's like church adjacent and faith promoting, etc., but unofficial, right? Does her
Yes.
condition now, her status now, bring it up to kind of more official level? And this is not the first case. We have Brad Wilcox, for example, who's been a general officer for a few years now as well, who has a decades long career as a public speaker, as a writing books and doing all this type of stuff, and that's his full time career, pretty much, along with being a professor, if I'm remembering correctly. So that's another case in which, I don't know. For me, the question, I don't have a full answer to the question. I see both the pros and the cons, and I think it's good to be aware of the cons. But I don't know. That's just me. I don't know, Georgia.
Well,
Any thoughts on that?
I actually don't have many thoughts on it. I
Yeah.
haven't formulated it properly in my mind yet. I just, maybe this is a bit of a cop out answer, but do we believe in inspiration?
Yeah.
Yes. Therefore, she's the right person at the right time, and regardless of what her other work is. But I'm glad that it was her, because as someone who often feels a little bit out of touch with sort of cultural church things, because I haven't been in it my whole life, I had actually heard of her before. So when they announced her name, it was a nice feeling to know who she was, because I felt like there was a level of trust that was already there, because I felt good listening to her, her various things that she's talked about and whatnot. So that's my perspective on it.
Right, and that's great, because the other side, like if we call a complete unknown for most people, that's also a cost, right? It's like we don't know them. It's really difficult to establish a relationship. Like we ask, like, why are they even there?
Yeah, you
And
have
of
to
course, we
build up
believe in
that trust.
inspiration, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting thought. And well, we would love to know what the listeners think of, and of course, we wish the absolute best to Sister Freeman, Sister Runia, and Sister Spanos. I hope I'm saying that right. Um, I have a young woman daughter, so it's in my best interest that they do a fantastic job, and we're grateful for their service that started this week. So, next article, Danny, you want to throw one?
Yes.
Sorry.
Sorry. Sorry. Church magazine subscriptions. Oh, whoa.
Okay.
Now available at no cost. Sorry, listeners, for this.
The news is
I don't know what
huffing.
happened. I don't know what
This one
happened,
was
but I'm
surprising
fine.
for me. The church magazines at no cost. I don't know why. I just had never really thought about it before. But I feel like we're in an age where we're going really digital. So it really surprised me that they decided to bring that print publication to more members, I guess. And it's in a staggered way, isn't it? There are certain places that are getting that subscription before others, but then ultimately it will be available to all. Is that correct?
From what I
Yes, I,
read, it
I
was,
think
yeah. Oh, go
I,
ahead.
I think it will be a logistic nightmare if they would do it to the whole
All at
world
once.
immediately, all at once. Yes.
But
Yeah.
will it?
So
Will
I think
people
it's
actually go for this?
It's a good question. So, well, for those that haven't read the article, yeah, basically all of out of nowhere, so to speak, the church announced that all of the church magazines, which there are three official ones, the Friend, I was going to say the New Era, but that's the old name, for the Strength of Youth, the one for youth, and then the Liahona, or Liahona. How do you say in English?
Leah Honer, I think.
Liahona. Okay, that's good.
yeah, Hona.
But
Um,
don't quote me on that. But I
okay.
think so.
Well, that's how we say it in Britain, I guess we can say. Well, those three magazines now are available for free for everybody, and It's a I had the same thought, Georgia, that it's an interesting turn on a slightly different direction than the trajectory of many other things, with things going digital, with Gospel Library, the recent addition of hymns to the kind of the Sunday services hymns on the church app to kind of facilitate using the phone rather than physical hymn books. So now there's a big turn to start printing kind of actual paper again.
But
Uh,
but I think, Danny, I think it makes a lot of sense in the following aspects. First of all, you've got an older population of the church that doesn't use any technology. So, I
Mhm.
mean, we've seen it in our words, like the older members asking for the manuals, come and follow me, and the Lejonas, right? I mean, they want their physical option, right? So that's one thing. Then you've got families that are preventing their kids from using technology in a younger age. So I don't know, having friends printed is another way to have a good experience on a regular basis, right? Or maybe you want to use one of the, I don't know, the activities there for the family home naming or whatnot, right? And then you have for of the youth, where you would have, I don't know, this magazines available physically at home, so your kids can take them instead of thinking that they will use them when they're using their computer or whatever. So it's, again, it's a way to, bring these things more available, right? Or available in all the possible, in the omni channel,
Yeah,
experience, right?
makes sense. I mean, what we were talking about, and we were talking about it for a good couple of months about having Sunday programs printed out, right? Which many members, mostly on the older generations, value a lot and ask for. And it's been difficult to kind of get it done. But yeah, there's value in having physical things. And thanks for putting it that way. I hadn't first thought, my thoughts went straight into the logistics, into cost, and into kind of these digital trends. But yeah, that's super interesting. I do have another angle to it as well. I want to know what you think. Is that um, church magazines are kind of within the spectrum of our canon, so to speak. If we start with the very top canonical stuff, we have the Book of Mormon, the Bible, right? And from them we go to kind of ancient and modern prophets teachings and general conferences, like a continuum. Then church magazines probably come there, and then we have other things until we become kind of outside of the realm of official church content into more apocryphal and whatnot, and so on and so forth. Now, uh, I felt like, we're giving away for free something. I don't think there's any precedent to this other than the kind of church manuals, kind of part of the church curriculum that we do for free. And now we're doing the magazines for free. Does it show a bit of a prior kind of? Does it shed any light into the priorities of or church leaders on what content we may want to have better access to, as opposed to, for example, we'll make the Bible and the Book of Mormon for free for every member, right? Everybody can get a quad now or a triple combination, whatnot. But instead, we're doing the magazines. Do you think there's any angle to that? On, okay, we want to probably add an extra level of access and prioritization and readership to this content, or am I thinking too much again?
I'm not sure. Again, I don't have an answer. I I wonder if there's more to come. I wonder if there'll be some other announcement. They did restructure the way that the magazines were uh, printed a few years ago, right? Because they got rid of the ensign and then they combined it into the Leahona. But I think the bottom line is, I think they want more people reading the magazines. I can't see another reason why they would make them free
Yeah,
other than they want to increase the amount of people who are reading.
yeah,
And I think also, I mean, after or during the pandemic, we had this uh, families' self-reliance in terms of spiritual self-reliance, right? The capacity of families to spiritually nourish themselves, right? So you've got the scriptures, you've got general conference, and then you've got the church magazines that are regular, right? They're monthly, productions, right? Because of that, you will have families in the church having monthly spiritual takes, right? Those that don't have social media will have this as a regular basis, right? Those that don't find themselves attracted to technology will have this anyway. So those that don't have access to YouTube or social media or whatever, right, will have in their houses for free, no excuse, right?
Mhm.
The opportunity to read church related content that is spiritual, that is uplifting, and that is addressed to all the members of the family, right? If you have kids, you've got friends. If you have teenagers, you've got for strength of youth. And then if you have just adults, you'll have the Hona. So again, it's a way of I think prioritizing constant spiritual nourishment
Yeah.
in church families or individuals, right? That are members
Yeah.
of the church. So
And you know what? Something that I find quite nice about the magazines is that they go to places that usually we don't go to a lot on Sunday services or in our conversations. Like a lot of the content that the church has put out regarding mental health and other tough topics related kind of to that and other aspects. Those are generally very well covered and generally very prioritized in the magazines. And I'm thinking mostly on the Liahona, right, for adults, but also for the youth. So uh, yeah, I think making that more accessible would be great for members. I hope people open it. I'm subscribed to, I think, all of them, and sometimes there are months that they stay in the shrink wrap and they don't get open. So now it's an invitation for me to actually read them, and also for leaders at church and for members and teachers and all of that would be kind of easier to refer to that content as well. So
Yeah, I
a lot
wonder
of
if they
positives.
may. I wonder if they may tweak the content slightly as well. If they know that it's reaching a wider audience, if they may bring in more articles that they want people
Hmm.
to read, or they may ask us to include certain parts of those articles in church meetings. I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
just speculating, but this leads really nicely into the next piece of news that we have actually, which is that there is a special edition of the Friend magazine, which is specifically concentrating on baptism and confirmation, which I think is great. I think the more the children know about baptism and confirmation, the more empowered they can be to make a decision on whether they want to be baptized. I think it's fascinating that age 8 is the age of accountability, and certainly in sort of secular studies, having recently spoken to a psychologist about this, there are a lot of studies which show that by age of 8 you can make your own decisions. So there's a science behind it as well as a spiritual justification for it. And I think it's brilliant that they've brought out this new edition, because I think it is an area where children need a lot of guidance and need to have those conversations. And I don't know, I've not reached that point yet with my own children, so maybe you have a perspective that I don't, but I think those conversations need to be had. It's a huge decision, baptism. It's not one that you should enter into without serious thought.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. I think that the exact fad, like I'm fully behind the our doctrine and our teachings regarding the age of accountability from a standpoint of what are the very basics that we need to understand to make this commitment. Uh, but then from a more kind of secular standpoint, sometimes I think 8-year-olds are quite young, right? Are we really doing them a disservice by
Well, it is the
some
minimum
things?
age. You know, you
Yeah,
don't have to be
exactly.
baptized at 8. You could be baptized later if it's not the right
Exactly,
age
that's the
for you.
thing. But do we allow ourselves in our church culture to kind of give families, maybe parents, that space that maybe like, you know what, my child is just not ready, and maybe they'll get baptized later, and do we introduce an element of judgment there, and maybe questioning like, oh, why is that kid not baptized? I think there's a layer there that exists, and it's quite real. But I think that the fact that centrally the church is doing something about that ultimately helps everyone, not just the kids, but everybody take this covenant more seriously and be better prepared for it. I think I'm 200% behind this. I'm really, really happy to see it. Danny, any thoughts?
yes, I mean, you were mentioning this, and Giorgio was mentioning that it's the minimum age, and I totally agree. And I've seen it before, like people saying my kid's not ready, we're going to wait as a family, or and I think that's what the church is about, right? I
Their
mean,
prerogative.
sometimes we're just judgmental just because we know this is the standard or this is the way it has to be done. It's like going on a mission, right? You have to go when you're 19. Now it's when you're 18, and if you don't go, people start thinking, maybe something
Mhm.
happened here. I don't know, right?
Yeah.
It becomes suspicious about whichever reason, but I think it's just natural that some people will have different, experiences, and people will maybe think things differently from us, and it's okay. It's just because it's not canon or it's not the way people traditionally have done it before, it doesn't mean that it's bad. So I mean, uh, in my perspective, my oldest son was baptized before we came to the US, and I was happy to see that he was willing, he felt himself ready. We asked him. I mean, we didn't push him, and hopefully in time he will value that, right? I mean, he did a covenant. We were just teaching him what we think is best, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we wanted him to do it just because it was his birthday, or in fact we had to delay it a little bit because we needed some more time, or something happened in the ward. I don't remember exactly what, but it wasn't in the same birthday day, and it was okay, right? And I remember my personal experience. I was baptized with another friend, and she was 9, right? And it was good because I mean her family decided for whatever reason that was, and it was okay, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we need to be more aware that people might have different takes or different experiences, personal experiences, and what's most important is if they're ready or not if they're complying with the age or with the social standard, but if they're
Yeah.
ready to take on this covenant, and this willingness to cry with others and to support others, right? And to be part of the
I totally
wider.
agree. And I think maybe I'm being a bit naive, but I do think that when the time is right, you will know when it's right. For me, being baptized at age 20 was a brilliant thing for me because I needed to experience not being a member to know how precious being a member is for me. For someone else, their journey might look different. Maybe they need to be baptized at 8 to sort of keep their testimony alive. It might be completely different. But I think the ultimate thing that we need to do is to just respect that agency and to not be judgmental. If you end up getting baptized, if you're ready at age 8, great. If you end up being a bit later in life, that's fine as well.
Yeah. And on that note, just my last comment is more of an anecdote. I was recently talking to someone that wants to get baptized when they turn 8, right? And I'm delighted. I mean, a particular conversation, especially how eager and how from this little person this came, and how prepared they felt, right? And I could sense it, like, yeah, this person really really wants to do it, and we should be supportive of that. And I'm glad we have, um, that our doctrine backs that up as well, while at the same time preventing that people too young are forced into that commitment, right? Which is a kind of one of the major distinctions that from early on in the restoration differentiated our faith from others as part of the restoration of all things. Like if you go to the Book of Mormon, even, right, the first thing that Jesus encounters after coming down, and everybody like, wow, he's like, okay, you guys are arguing about baptism, so let's sort this out. So it's always been kind of a multi-dispensation topic of discussion. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to this special edition to come out and see what's in there. And I'm sure it's going to be great. Cool. We have time for a couple more, I think. The next one, this is a different one, more local to to this region of the world. It's from Religion News Service, and it says Irish Mormons face dwindling numbers, but researcher finds their community inspirational. So again, this is from Religious News Service, not a church. This is the first kind of non-church official article that we pick up on, and it's from last week. It's an interesting article on the experience of two wards or two branches, I think, near Dublin in the Republic of Ireland, and how they operate, etc. And this is done by by a non-member researcher, a sociologist, I think, that had an interest in minority faiths that were not kind of from a different non-Christian background. As you know, the Republic of Ireland is highly Catholic, and there's kind of a commingling of both the national and religious identity that sometimes, according to this researcher, kind of makes kind of this monolithic assumption that all whites there are Catholic, and kind of the non-Christian ones are from other ethnic groups that are in Ireland. Whereas in this case, with our church, is a multi-ethnic, including kind of white Irish members that are there, even though the church is quite small there. So it is an interesting article. I don't know if you guys had time to go through it and see what you thought. I'm just going to say that the title seemed a bit misleading. Correct me if I'm wrong, but dwindling to me means kind of declining. Is that a right interpretation?
Yeah.
However, the article mentions that church members on record have actually increased over the last 10 or so years, and attendance has remained flat. So that there was no indication that there's a dwindling. So it's like, okay, we probably need a better word there to describe it, but it does talk about the reality of a church that is small, with small numbers. In one ward had 70 people attending, others had 30, and also highlighted some, I don't know if resentment what was the word that they used there, but some members that felt that being lumped with the UK, with the rest of the British Isles, there's a complex history there. Being lumped there, they didn't feel that was something they were happy with. And even from a mission standpoint, Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, is part of the Scotland Ireland mission, which includes Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Ireland. And because of the long conflict there, some members were not happy with it. Any thoughts on it? I think it's always nice to do a deep dive on these very local stories, and I don't know what you guys thought.
Yeah, the thing that jumped out to me is that a non-religious scholar decided to study our religion. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
That she had made that decision to do that. So that was the thing that jumped out to me. And then just looking at the congregations, I think there were some valuable insights about what it's like to be a member outside of a place where there's a high density of members. A lot of it resonated with me. I mean, our congregation, Daniel, is reasonably the same size as one of the
Yeah.
congregations that was studied there, and I think there are huge benefits to being in an area with a low population density of members of the church. I think we really have to choose to go to church every Sunday. Nobody's watching us. We can go or we can not go. We have to be very intentional about our faith, and we really stand aside from, what's that phrase? Like, we're not in the grain. Do you know what I mean? I can't think of the right phrase. We go against the grain. That's the phrase.
Okay.
We go against the grain by being members here, which I think strengthens our faith, or at least it does for me. So that article was kind of a nice one to read.
Yeah, and of all places, one that it's a very specific, with a very specific kind of set of circumstances that have some nuances that we might just not think about, kind of national conflict and other things. So that was very good. We're happy that our faith gets the attention of research outside of just our own little Mormon studies cohort. So yeah, happy to move to the next one. Danny, do you have one? Been a bit silent on this one.
Yes, we've got one related to South America, right? President of Peru joins faith leaders in prayer, right? Interesting take. I mean, I think in general, church PR has done a wonderful job related to governments and related to political leaders. I think this neutral standpoint of the church helps us a lot because, I mean, we we live in countries and we have the effects, the positive and negative of living in different countries, and of course, being led by different leaders or presidents. So it's important for from a church perspective that we've got good relations with all of them, right? No matter which color or which political party they come from, and the fact that church members, right, can be a positive influence in countries is just a good, let's say, kind of, it's a good way to represent the church in whichever
Yeah,
place,
to be
right?
part of
And
that. Yeah.
I'm not familiar with this story. Can you tell me more about what's actually happened?
So yeah, the in Peru, I think it's part of their national festivities, kind of independence festivities. In Peru, they hold a National Day of Prayer, and I think they've been doing it for the last 2 or 3 years. And actually, the church has hosted this event for the last two at least. I know that last year they actually hosted it in the in temple grounds. I didn't check on the article here if it was the same case, but for example, last year they did it with a number of other faiths, and government officials came, and then they do this kind of multi-faith event where they pray for the country. And one interesting tidbit about this event last year is that, or maybe 2 years ago, is that they had a projection on the Lima Peru temple, kind of a light projections, and one of the signs projected onto it was a cross, a Roman cross, kind of the more related to the tradition of Catholicism or other Christian faiths rather than ours, where we've kind of stepped away from that over the last few decades. And I remember there were articles kind of talking about that. Oh, this is the first time that we see a cross in a temple, in an LDS temple. But yeah, so that happened this week as well. And I think the country president, Dina Boluarte, was there. So you can't get very much higher than that when you're kind of hosting an event for government officials and religious leaders. And I think that there's some interesting takes to this. I agree with you, Danny. I think it's good that the church is actively taking part on these conversations and kind of looking after the interests of our faith community and other faiths as well, and the overall the
I
community.
mean, if we don't do this, we don't exist, right? For countries, I don't know, the census will not ask people if they're LDS or not, for instance,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, we have to be actively, and we've been invited to do so, right? If we think that we have an opportunity, or we have the intention to be politically active, then we might do it as well, as a way of representing our values, and the way we see things, and the way we want places to be or to become, right? And I think it's relevant, it's useful, and especially in countries like Peru or Chile, where there's a high density population of members of the church, it's just a good idea to be actively involved in these kinds of things, and of course to promote, right, interreligion experiences where leaders of the church are representing our faith, and our values, and our
Yeah,
doctrine
I
as
think
well.
that cross faith collaboration I'm really supportive of, and it makes me happy. I think having grown up in the 90s, where I still feel back then we had kind of more of an antagonistic view of other faiths, and I'm glad we're hopefully past that for the most part. I do think there is an angle to this that it's good to be cognizant of, or at least mindful, is that when you kind of put yourself out there for to be with government leaders, especially when some of them might be have some sort of controversy attached to them. And I don't know the details about Dina Boluarte in Peru, but I do know that it's been quite um, a difficult last few years in Chile in terms of government stability, etc. She was the vice president of the previous president, and she took over after he was ousted, and there's been protests and accusations of police brutality and things like that. So when we associate to like it's not cost less, it's not for free. That there's a potential cost associated to um, associating, sorry for the redundancy, to some government officials. And I don't need to give other examples, but I think we can all think of a few examples from many, many countries where that might be tricky, right? But there's probably, like, when you do the cost benefit analysis, there's probably a big benefit to that. A big one, for example, 6 years ago or so, was when the Tabernacle Choir went and sang at Donald Trump's inauguration, right? That was very complex for many people for obvious reasons that we don't need to delve into here. But I wonder sometimes if we're doing enough due diligence on some of kind of the associations that we enter into. But having said that, I'm supportive of it. I don't think we should live in isolation, right? We live in a world that is complex with leadership that is complex. But those are all my thoughts on that. I think we have time for maybe one more before we wrap up because we don't want to go over too much. So, Georgia, since you're our guest today, do you want to share one last?
Yeah, I would love to share that this week is the beginning of the British pageant,
Woohoo.
which I am going to assume that the listeners know what a pageant is. I didn't until a couple of years ago, but it's essentially a show. And the British pageant tells the story of the early saints, and it's an absolutely fascinating, faith promoting show. There's some wonderful music and wonderful narrative. And there's such a rich history of the saints in the UK, which would fill the time in another podcast, I'm sure. But they're actually going to be live streaming it, which has never been done before for a pageant, because I know there have been various pageants in various places over the years. But on the 11th of August, there'll be a live stream, which I think is really interesting. And it speaks to our previous point about getting our name out there and trying to be a part of the wider community. And I know in some of the posters for pageant that I've seen online and also in person, they have targeted them to people who aren't members of our faith and who don't attend our congregations, and they've invited them to come along and to learn about this pocket of the earth and what happened here almost 200 years ago.
That's great. Yeah.
And where is it? How many people does it involve on
Oh,
average? Can
it's
you
a
tell me?
huge scale production. So it's in the grounds of the Preston Temple. So we've got two temples here. We've got one south of London and Preston, which is in northern England. And yeah, it's in the grounds of the temple. They have a big marquee. I think I heard, don't quote me on this, but I think it's the biggest marquee in Europe currently, or something like that.
Wow.
That I heard in one of the promotional videos. And I think they're hoping, for thousands of people to attend.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I'll join the live stream. I won't be able to be there in person, unfortunately. I did get an invite because they're doing like an early showing again, kind of a diplomatic one with government officials and things like that. And I think the Chile ambassador is going, so they reached out to some Chilean members if they can make it, and I got note of that too late, so I can't. But yeah, it's huge. I've only been to one of this when the Nauvoo pageant was still a thing. I don't think it exists anymore, because back then there were like about a dozen different pageants around the world that were official church events. And I think this is one of the few surviving ones. The other one might be Manti, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know about the rest. But yeah, it's a
Yeah.
huge undertaking, and people really take pride on kind of this local event, but with an impact on the church worldwide, because the British Isles really fed on the early decades of church history, really fed our church membership with converts that migrated from here to the US
Yeah, I have a
mostly.
statistic on that actually. Nearly half of the population of Utah in 1870 were British immigrants. So it
Well,
just
I had
shows
no
you how
Whoa,
idea.
many people moved over. And Queen
it's
Victoria
huge.
actually noticed that so many people were leaving
We're
this
leaving.
country and heading over to cross the plains, that she made a comment on it. She was given a copy of the Book of Mormon by missionaries who came over, Queen Victoria.
Well, it's
Oh,
really,
that's
really
that's
cool.
that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I have an interesting. I mean, what is happening here is that, and this pageants pageants. Here we've got something that is called Trek, which is also a representation of the pioneers walking through the plains, and this happens every 4 years. But because of the pandemic, it's been 5 years since the last. And then the state where I am right now in Albany, Albany State in New York, they're having it also this week, right? It's the 10, the 11, and the 12th, and it has a whole structure of mas and pas. They're in charge of hand carts, and they're with young men and young women that are assigned, and they enroll 14-year-olds onwards, and it's very interesting. And they will have something, a final congregation where they're going to get into a final stage on the 12th, and we've been invited as members of the stake to be there and to see how they finish and they wrap it up. And the younger young men and young women are also invited that Saturday morning to walk the last miles, where they reach like the Salt Lake Valley, or a representation of it. So I think all this efforts to recognize our pioneer history. And I mean, even Danny, UK, and myself, I mean, our parents were pioneers. Georgia, you're a pioneer because you became a member of the church, so you have your own story behind it, and it's important to recognize it and to portray it in a way that is it helps your kids and others around you resonate on how interesting or challenging or whatever we want to call it was. So it's, I think it's useful. It's funny, of course, because they wear all these pioneer clothes, you know, and it's funny to see them dressed like
As an
wearing clothes.
outsider, that just seems so bizarre, but
Yeah,
if
of course. Yeah,
you know,
of
if
course.
it's
I get
page
it. I get it.
promoting, then why not? But it's
Yeah,
just funny
they
to me.
and they walk the miles, you know. I mean, they actually walk all these miles. They have a standard bucket where they put all their belongings. No cell phones, no technology. I mean, it's the whole experience for 3 days for this kid. So I've never heard any of the kids that have done it before something bad about it. I mean, it was like a good experience for them, and because it doesn't happen that frequently, also gives the chance to once in your youth days, yeah, to have that experience. And I mean, funny fact, my in-laws are here now, are visiting us from Chile, so I'm looking forward taking them and myself seeing it, right? Because I haven't seen it before. So I think it will be a very nice experience in the
Hmm.
in the overall experience as a church member. So I'm happy.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. And I personally think that all of these expressions of celebration at a local or maybe regional level, like the British pageant, or as you were mentioning, Trek, we embrace those, we support those. They are part of our peculiarity as a people, right? And we wish all the best to those participating in these different places. Also, Georgia, thank you very much for being
Thank
with us
you.
today. It's been a pleasure to have you with us. And you can find us on social media, on Twitter, or is it Twitter or is it X, or do we actually know what that thing is called? But anyway, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and especially on contact at thisweekinmormons.com. That's how you reach us if you have any suggestions, comments, questions. Maybe you didn't like something you heard today. Let us know, and we'll be happy to read your comments. And don't forget to find us on Patreon as well, where we're headed now to record that exclusive segment. And see you all there.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Take care until the next one. Bye.